Christ formed in you for the sake of others. Welcome to the Wild Way Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the penultimate Explore episode of A Slow Journey Through John.
Didn't you think that penultimate meant something else and you were like harshly corrected when you were in university?
Actually, it was in my master's.
Tell me.
I thought penultimate was just a fancy way of saying ultimate.
So for those of you who may not know, penultimate means what we're, in this context, the second last.
Yes, the second to the end. Explore episode. Obviously, we have some annotations.
Yeah, so tell us about what's going to happen. So today we reached the end of the gospel, which is like blowing my mind. And then what's next week going to be about?
Next week is going to be a slow landing to a slow journey through John, and we're going to be revisiting some of the major themes and teachings.
And for those who are following along in real time, I feel like this is just going to be such a nice way to be practicing Advent as well, because we're in week 2 of Advent here as we're recording live. And I think that will be a nice way for people to enter into Advent, just to finish up the Gospel of John like that.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
Okay, let's jump into the penultimate Explore episode, Nick.
So this past week, as you mentioned, we wrapped up chapter 21. So it's our final week in the actual gospel text itself. And we also had our final imagination prayer this past week. And so we first looked at Peter's restoration to ministry and how Jesus heals Peter's painful memory of denying Jesus 3 times. And no surprise at all, it boils down to the importance of mutual love.
And mutual love being between Jesus and Peter and Jesus.
Yes, yeah, exactly. That love has to be both ways. And then we also looked at Peter's question about the disciple whom Jesus loved, where Jesus basically told Peter to mind his own business and focus on his own discipleship journey. And then we wrapped up the entire gospel with the final verses about the author of John's gospel and what it means for us today that Jesus did many more things than recorded in this gospel.
I feel like Peter once again gets a smackdown.
Yeah.
It's almost as if the author of this book just really doesn't like Peter and is finding one last way to give him a smackdown.
Yeah,
anyway,
could be.
One thing I liked about this week is that I really liked your centering practice, because sometimes I think we worry about the people that we love, or we worry about the people in our community, and we just don't know what to do with that. It's like a burden that we are carrying for that person. We often don't even have the words to say or to pray. We don't know what to do. And I really liked the practice of just like immersing that person in the love of God and releasing them to that love. Like, I feel like that can be a really helpful practice for people now and coming up in the future, next time that you're carrying somebody in such a burdensome way. And I would, if you want to be very challenging, this would be a practice that you could do for your enemy.
Yes.
This is a way to love your enemy. If you were able to imagine that person in the divine love of God and releasing them to that, would be very powerful for you, I think.
Yep.
Anyway.
And also, actually, now that I think about it, it would also be a very powerful thing to imagine yourself in that situation, in that divine presence.
That might even be the most challenging thing.
Yeah.
Like just receiving love without performing or doing or being anything. Yeah.
Okay, why don't we jump into these final 11 verses, and we will start with verses 15 to 17.
When they finished eating, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Simon replied, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." Jesus asked a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Simon replied, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." Jesus said to him, "Take care of my sheep." He asked a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was sad that Jesus asked him a third time, "Do you love me?" He replied, "Lord, you know everything. You know I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep."
So we took 2 days to go through these few verses, and one of the reasons was because I wanted to spend more time unpacking it, because I don't think I learned this the right way the first time I went through this. I'm wondering for yourself, before you study this for yourself, what were you taught about this passage, or what did you as a teacher teach about this passage?
I can't recall specific teaching, but it all centered around the 3 words for love that were used. So I was always taught Jesus was, do you love me unconditionally?
Mhm.
And finally, Peter gets to the unconditional one. And then, yeah, I don't really know. I haven't had great teaching on this, I don't think. How about you?
That may have been my teaching that you heard, because that's how I originally understood it.
That's awkward. Okay, yeah, I'm sure I've heard you teach on it.
Yes,
So
you
are you
probably
gonna
have.
are you gonna blow my mind and tell me something different now?
Yeah, the first time I heard it, and then also the first time I taught it, was very much focused on the different Greek words for love, because Jesus asked, "Do you agape love me?" And Peter replies, "Yes, I phileo love you." And then, "Do you agape love me?" "Yes, I phileo love me." And then
Phileo means I love you like a brother or a friend.
yeah, unpack that in a second. And then finally, on the third one, Jesus says, "Do you phileo love me?" And Peter gets all grieved and sad, because it seems like Jesus is saying, "Do you even like me, Peter? If you don't agape love me, do you even like me?" And then he says, "You know everything. You know I love you." And so anyway,
So right now we are about to watch the evolution of Nick's theology.
yes.
And everyone evolves in their theology. We all start somewhere and we end up somewhere else.
Before we get to there, let's just once again recap or unpack how we got to this point.
Okay.
I think in the meditations we quoted N.T. Wright, and he was talking about how in chapter 13, Peter insists very, very loudly and emphatically that I'm going to remain loyal to you, Jesus. I'm not going to let you down. I will follow you wherever you go, to prison, to death, wherever. In fact, even if everyone else falls away, I will follow you.
And to be honest, this is probably the last conversation that Jesus had with him. Jesus had just said, love everybody and wash their feet. And Peter ignored that and focused on this. And
Yes.
now it's like Jesus is bringing it all back around. So Peter finally gets the point that he never got back then.
To give due credit, he probably really thought that and meant that. Like, he probably thought, I am going to stay true to Jesus, because he loved Jesus that much.
Passionate people in the moment, they fully believe what they say in the moment.
Yeah. And so he speaks with a lot of bravado. And then in chapter 18, he does follow Jesus, but when he gets there, it all goes horribly wrong. And because of that, not even the resurrection itself would have erased the pain and the stain of that memory in Peter's mind.
Just his humiliation and
Yes.
absolute failure, that like one second he's gonna die for Jesus and the next he pretends he doesn't even know him. He must have just been roiling around in shame.
Totally. And we can probably even see Peter's mindset, like last week when we talked about how Jesus appeared on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. And when the disciple who Jesus loved says, "Hey, that's Jesus," Peter throws himself into the sea. Like, he is so desperate to get to Jesus. So then they have breakfast, and Jesus turns to Peter and says, "Hey, Peter, let's go for a walk." And as they walk, Jesus turns to Peter and starts to speak to him. So that's where we get to this conversation that we just read. But if you were Peter, what would you expect Jesus to say?
I think it would really depend on who you understand Jesus to be, because if that had been me out of what I had been taught, I would expect that Jesus was going to be angry with me because I'd fail and he was about to rip a strip off me. However, I don't believe that's what Peter would have expected, because he had spent like 3 years with Jesus following him and he knew who Jesus was. And so I'm sure he was actually probably expecting grace and love. And I think the hardest part for Peter was not going to be facing Jesus, but it would be like admitting his failure to Jesus and then receiving that grace and love, right?
When you feel so terrible about yourself, receiving grace from another person, it almost emphasizes the pain that we feel.
I think everybody can probably relate to, you've done something terribly wrong, and the person you expect to correct you or be furious is actually gentle and kind.
Yeah.
When that happens to me, I break down, and it's the kindness that leads me to repentance.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's happening here. Jesus is about to give him kindness, and Peter will fully be healed and restored and repent.
And so we mentioned in the meditation how we are about to witness a powerful moment of reconciliation between Jesus and Peter. Have you ever had to navigate a complicated reconciliation? If so, what was that like?
I can't remember the specifics, but I can remember the feeling of it. When you do something wrong, you feel gross inside. But then there's something about when you face the person, you confess and you ask for forgiveness, and then they give it to you. It's like you get free and you find this peace. There's something about it that it's a really powerful thing.
Yeah.
Now, Nick, I can think of 2 or 3 instances where you tried to reconcile fractured relationships. How did that go for you?
Well, I've learned that reconciliations can be tricky, especially if we've been hurt by someone, or obviously if we've hurt someone. And to forgive, I mean, Jesus teaches us in John, like to forgive is good, but restoring a relationship is not always the right thing, the safe thing, the healthy thing to do if we've been wounded by someone. And so I've been on both sides where I've had moments where I have tried to reconcile with someone only to be rebuffed by them. And I've also had broken relationships that have not reconciled in the sense of not come back into relationship, and probably for the better. Like the forgiveness has been there and I've gone through the forgiveness, but have not reconciled to bring that person back into my life.
Yeah. I remember, I don't know, 15 years ago, I had a broken relationship with a friend who was like a really close friend, and we decided like our friendship was over. It was devastating.
Yeah.
I still think about her and I still feel quite devastated by it, but I feel like I did everything that I had to do that. And she just wasn't interested in maintaining a friendship.
I think you just hit the nail right on the head, because the instruction for us in scripture is not to reconcile with everyone. The instruction in Ephesians is do what you can to live at peace with everyone. Peace and reconciliation, it's a two-way street. So if we are doing what we can to be at peace with someone, to reconcile with someone, and that person says no, they don't want peace or they don't want reconciliation, it might be hard for us, but we can walk away saying, okay, I know I've done everything that I could do to be at peace, and you can have that burden off your shoulders and don't need to carry that anymore.
And the other thing is like you cannot control other people, right?
Exactly.
If they do not give consent for the relationship to be restored, you can't do anything about it. And so sometimes, even though you might want a relationship to restored, if they don't want it, you have to respect that. A way of loving them is to just allow them to have that choice.
Yeah, and so here we get to witness the reconciliation between Jesus and Peter. But one thing that John doesn't mention that we know from Luke and also from 1 Corinthians is that Jesus, before this moment, Jesus has already met with Peter one-on-one on the day of his resurrection. We don't know what conversation they had at that time, but it's important for Peter to be restored in front of everyone.
Of course, because he's about to be like the main leader of this church of Jesus that is now going to be erupting all over the place.
Yeah.
And so they need to see that Jesus has publicly affirmed him.
Yes, exactly right. And the important thing I think that we need to note here is that Jesus took the initiative. Jesus went and hunted Peter down to restore him. And Jesus isn't angry. He's not avoiding Peter. He is a good shepherd who is seeking out and restoring a lost sheep. And Peter's not lost in the sense that he walked away from Jesus, but he's lost in his shame. And he feels like he's lost his call to ministry. And so Jesus seeks him out because Jesus always pursues us. There's nothing we could do that would cause him to cast us off or turn his back on us. And so he's always pursuing us for reconciliation when there's a fracture in our relationship with him. But have you ever been in that position where Peter was, where you felt like, oh man, I blew it. I don't think I can continue on in ministry?
That's like the story of my life.
Oh, really?
Actually.
Okay.
As somebody who has been in ministry for the past like 15 years, I constantly think, I'm such a mess up. I should not be, who am I to teach anybody? This is terrible. But I think comes from, I was talking to my sister last week, and how we were both taught that following Jesus equals achieving moral perfection. That's what we learned. And if you think that's what following Jesus is about, that when you fall, you will spiral and you're going to think that you're totally unworthy of ministry. So when I look at my sinful past, or if I lose my temper with my husband, which happens, I can tend to spiral in shame and believe that I shouldn't be in ministry. I certainly shouldn't be teaching people how to follow Jesus or love others when I'm such a big failure at that. But achieving moral perfection is a totally twisted version of Christianity.
Totally.
Yeah. And it returns us just to following laws instead of living in our newness of our resurrected life in Christ. Because we now have, we live with his spirit. We have these new hearts and we're constantly being transformed into the image of God. I'm trying to learn to rest in the truth of who I am in Christ now and trying to have more grace for my failures. And
I would say that when we stumble, we have a failure, we lose our temper, whatever it is, it's easy to pinpoint that moment and say, look at what a failure I am. But if we were to take the bigger picture of the trajectory of our life,
just blow it out 5 years, 10 years, 20 years.
Exactly.
It's a blip.
You would see that the trajectory is more and more in union with Christ, more and more having Christ formed in you. And when we focus on that particular moment, that's all about perfection. I wasn't perfect in that moment. But when you look at the life trajectory, you say, oh, Jesus is drawing me closer and closer into Christ likeness over the years of my life. And this is just another step.
Yeah. And when you fail, you learn a lot about yourself and you learn, you learn to walk differently.
Yeah. I know for me, when my first marriage fell apart, I definitely wondered if there would still be a place for me as a minister for Jesus. My concern was not over what Jesus thought about me. My concern was what other people thought. Would they allow a divorced pastor to minister to them? But I came to this place of feeling like Jesus said, who cares what they think? I've got plans for you. And that kind of kept me going. And so the way Jesus restores Peter is really brilliant. Jesus goes to where the pain is, and which is the way he often does. Like I know in my life, when there's been restoration, Jesus takes me to the place of pain and the place of failure and says, you can't ignore this. You can't skip around it. You can't just cover it over. You've got to face it and uproot it. And that happens through love and restoration. So Peter denied Jesus 3 times. And thus Jesus gives Peter 3 opportunities to reaffirm his love and his commitment, by each one healing 1 denial. And then on top of that, Jesus also affirms 3 times that Peter is still called to ministry. So for every denial, Jesus says, we're going to erase it with a declaration of your love. And then I'm going to reassure you that you are still called to ministry.
Now that would have been almost devastating for Peter, I think. Like he would have been in this pit of shame and failure and being like, I'm not worth being a disciple of Jesus. I failed. And Jesus keeps saying over and over again, no, you're going to feed my sheep 3 times. That would be so healing and also so hard to hear, especially if you were spiraling in shame.
Yeah, totally. Because on the one hand, you got Peter who is spiraling in shame, and Jesus, on the other hand, says, Peter, I've still got high hopes for you.
Yeah, like your future still exists in ministry. Don't worry.
I fully expect you to bear fruit.
Yeah.
But note his first question. He says, Simon, son of John, or some translations say Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these? So first of all, he doesn't call him Peter, which is he's been calling him up until this point.
So interesting that he would give him the name rock or steady, and he is not steady. No. And he was not a rock. But that's because, once again, Jesus looks at us and sees who we're becoming, not who we are in the moment, because eventually he does become the foundation of the church.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly right. Like he didn't name Peter Rocky or Rock because he was like stable in that moment. But he knew who he was going to be.
He knew the truth, like the seeds of who he would become in Christ.
Yeah. And then he also says, do you love me more than these? And some people think that Jesus, like the first time I heard this taught, they said that Jesus is referring to the fish, and in the way of saying, do you love me more than your old way of life?
Because they're sitting there cooking fish.
Yeah, they had cooked fish, and he had just drawn in, there's this huge net of fish sitting on the shore. But we have to remember Peter, his brashness and his bravado in declaring, even if everyone else falls away, Jesus, I will remain faithful to you. And so my theory is that Jesus is most likely saying to Peter, hey, Peter, do you really love me more than these other disciples do? Are you really better than them?
So not, Peter, do you love me more than you love these disciples? But Peter, do you love me more than these disciples love me?
Yes.
That's what he's trying to say. Because,
yes. That was his claim. That was Peter's
because
claim.
of course Peter would be like, yes, of
Yeah.
course. But now he's totally failed, right? And
Yep.
so Jesus is coming back to that and being like, remember, you
Yeah.
said, but where were you?
He's just showing Peter, like he's making Peter face his, basically Peter bragged
Yeah.
and
He's
said,
calling him out
yes.
on
Yeah.
big words.
Yeah. He's saying,
Big
Peter,
talker.
time for a little bit of humility. Do you really love me more than these other people do? And then we said in the meditation, that question, do you love me, is the ultimate question that can be asked of any follower of Jesus, because it is our ultimate calling. Before Jesus asks us to do something for him, he asks us to love him. And what we said was he calls us to love him as he is, not as we want him to be. Because Peter didn't want a crucified Lord. And so Jesus is asking, do you love me even though I'm being crucified? That's what he asks all of us. That's what we said in the meditation. Do you love me even when I forgive people that you think I should punish? Do you love me when I allow you to go through hard times instead of rescuing you? Do you love me when I act in a way that you don't want me to act?
Yeah. To love Jesus means we got to accept the mystery and the fact that we cannot control him. Loving Jesus means we surrender to something that's far beyond us, that does not fit into our neat, tidy boxes and expectations of who he should be, because he's never going to match those expectations.
Yeah. And
it's not, we can't conceive of who he is or how he's going to act in our puny little minds.
yes. And the concept of love is to surrender those demands or expectations on another person. So we surrender our desires for Jesus and say, I love you to be who you are. Because that's what love is. That's what love does. And we mentioned like a few moments ago how when I first learned and taught this, there's these different Greek words for love, and agape being the best form of love, and phileo being like this second-rate love, which refers to family love or friendship love. But all the modern scholars that I read, and even the ones that they had read, I'd say by far the vast majority would agree that these words in this culture at this time were used interchangeably. So there's no difference in meaning by Peter and Jesus using different words for love. The bottom line is Jesus is asking for mutual love, and Peter is affirming his mutual love for
So
Jesus.
basically he's saying, I love you. Do you love me?
Yes.
I love you. Do you love me? I love
Yes.
you. Do you love me?
Yes, exactly right. Exactly right. And Peter 3 times says, yes, I do love you. You know I love you. And
Finally, he cracks. It's like the first two, he's holding his composure. And then by the third, something in Peter cracks
yeah,
and breaks.
exactly.
And he's, yes, obviously I love you. And then we get to the heart of Peter.
Yep. Yeah. He's completely broken down at that point. And that's where Jesus 3 times gives him this restoration and a call to ministry, this commission to ministry, and which is really important because love, we've talked about this before, that love is not a feeling, it's an action.
Otherwise, it would have been okay for Peter just to stay in that little bubble of love and
Yes.
like that broken down place where he acknowledges his love.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's not how you love Jesus.
Exactly right. Jesus told us in the farewell discourses what love looks like. And it looks like loving others. It looks like sacrificial living. It looks like doing what he commands.
Yeah.
That's Jesus's love language. So when Peter says, yes, Lord, I love you, Jesus says, feed my lambs, take care of my sheep, feed my sheep. And so he's saying, this is your love in action.
You love me. Now this is what it's going to look like.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because this is one of our key themes out of this whole year in John, is that loving Jesus involves both being with Jesus, and then you can't stay there. You have to also align your lifestyle with Jesus's teaching and actions that we see in the gospel, because part of what it means to love Jesus means actually being Christ-like. Like if we love him, we obey him, and more over the trajectory of our lives, we begin to actually look more like him.
Exactly. Yeah. And we should note that just like Jesus and Peter use different words for love, Greek words for love, Jesus also uses different Greek words for sheep. A couple of times he says sheep. One time he says lamb, which is like the young sheep. But again, scholars today affirm that they mean the same thing.
Feed the people.
Yeah.
Love
exactly.
the people.
Yeah. Basically, he's saying, Peter, you are fully forgiven, you are fully restored, you are fully commissioned, and you will be loving others as a way of loving me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very encouraging.
It reminds me of this quote by William Barclay. We can prove that we love Jesus only by loving others. Love is the greatest privilege in the world, but it brings the greatest responsibility. We do not really love Christ unless we are prepared to face his task and take up his cross.
Mm.
Despite what we may say, if we're not loving other people, we are actually not loving Jesus.
Yeah, so we're living a really pale, anemic version of Christianity if we're focusing on being morally perfect and other people being morally perfect instead of taking up our cross and actually loving Jesus.
Yeah.
In ways that cost us something.
Yeah. And so to me, it's like we said this in the meditation, but you can also apply it into our life today. For Peter, it wasn't his confession of faith in John 6, where Jesus says, are you guys going to leave too? And Peter says, where would we go? You have the words of life. You're the Christ. It wasn't that confession of faith that proved Peter's love. It wasn't his promise to follow Jesus in John 13.
Or his willingness to die.
Or his willingness to die.
It wasn't his passion
Yes.
that proved his love.
Yeah. Jesus says it's going to be your willingness to love others. And so for us today, I think it's not our, if we've gone through some kind of sinner's prayer, that's not what proves our love for Jesus. It's not our passionate worship that proves our love for Jesus.
It's just our passionate heart.
Yes.
I have a very passionate heart for Jesus. But if I'm not out there loving people, this is useless. This is like dead in the water passion.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's not our confession of faith. It's not our passionate worship that demonstrates. Yeah, that demonstrate our love for Jesus. It is our willingness to wash the feet of the people around us and love others. Like we said before, that is Jesus' love language. That's what he wants from us.
In any community, whether it's at your workplace, in your community, in your world, whatever, there are people that other people will say are less worthy, whether they are immigrants or foreign workers or addicted or homeless and things like that. And we're called to also be extending kindness and like standing on their side with them as well. So it's not just like easy love, like loving the people in our daily life, but it's also loving the marginalized that are in our community and standing up for them.
Totally.
Yeah, and that's what it means by you got to take up your cross. Because, like, for instance, if everybody at your work or a group of people are unkind to one person, you have to take up your cross and choose, no, I'm going to do something the way of Jesus, even though I might be the next person on like the chopping block, and I'm going to be kind to that person. You have to sacrifice your desire for popularity, your desire for ego and all sorts of other things so that you can operate in the love of Jesus as you're called.
Yeah.
And so sometimes the cost is too great for people.
I was actually very recently in one of those situations where there was a person in the workplace where it just seemed like he became the scapegoat for some problems, and people started ganging up on him in a little way. And in the face of that, to still maintain kindness, to speak up for him. And
him like he's a human and check in on him and things like that. Right? Like we often, we're so quick to erase people's humanity and just treat them as objects or like people who don't feel things.
Exactly. Yeah. The last thing that I want to talk about in this little conversation here is the phrase that we use in the meditation about how Peter would be a leader with a limp. So let me explain what I mean by that. It refers back to the Genesis story of Jacob wrestling with God. And he had this encounter with God. God touched his hip, and basically he walked away with a limp. And so
that's what happens when you try to fight God.
But it just shows how we can encounter Christ, or we can encounter suffering, wrestling, and walk away with a limp. So what I mean by that in this context is that Peter would never be able to think of himself as perfect. He would never be able to have that bravado that he had in John 13. He could never think of himself as, I am the most passionate, sold out follower of Jesus. Even if all others fall away, I never will.
If anybody was going to get an award for discipleship, it would be me.
Yes,
because I am the most passionate, the strongest. I am the one who loves him the best.
Yes, Peter has walked through failure, and he knows he failed. He knows he's only being restored by the grace of Jesus. So leadership with a limp refers to leaders who have gone through pain or failure or brokenness, whether it's self-inflicted or inflicted by others, and who have been healed and restored and continue to follow Jesus, but they walk with that limp, just like Jacob did, to say, I've gone through this suffering, this failure, and I walk with a limp. And that limp reminds them all the time of the need for humility and wisdom, because that can only come from the limp. And it teaches us also, I think, that we should not be ashamed with our limp. And so I know for me, I only want to follow leaders with a limp. And I don't want to follow perfect leaders. I don't want to follow leaders who are full of bravado. I want to follow leaders who have gone to hell and back and have gone through their moments of suffering and have been restored and walk now with grace and humility that they didn't have before.
Sure. But I would also put a caveat there, because the key thing there was that they are restored, which means they have been transparent about, they've taken ownership of what they did to cause the failure, and they've been transparent about that, and they have returned to Jesus. They've been restored to Jesus and to community. I would be very careful about following leaders who have had some kind of big moral failure and insist that they didn't do anything wrong, or that they were abusive or destructive in some way and do not, like, they got caught or whatever, but didn't change anything moving forward. So that's not the kind of leader we're talking about here. We're talking about the leader who realizes they are not going to ever achieve perfection. They're just simply following Jesus like the rest of us are, as humble pilgrims on the journey. They're going to stumble. You're going to stumble. We're all going to mess up, but we're all moving forward.
Yeah. That's a good caveat and is absolutely right. We're talking about people who have gone through failure and suffering and come out the other side, having encountered God. So it gives me grace for others. It gives me humility. It gives me wisdom. It helps me lead. It helps me feed the sheep as a gentle, good shepherd.
And I also don't think you can be gifted at feeding the sheep unless you know what brokenness looks like, because otherwise their experience of suffering, you'll never be able to understand or enter in or care for them.
Yeah, absolutely right. And so, listener, if you walk with a limp, if you have had your moments of stumbling or failure, don't feel like your life is over or your opportunity to serve Jesus is over, because it's not. The good shepherd finds all his sheep and restores them back into the fold and into a meaningful life.
Yeah.
Okay, why don't we move on then? And can you read verses 18 to 23?
I assure you that when you were younger, you tied your own belt and walked around wherever you wanted. When you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will tie your belt and lead you where you don't want to go. He said this to show the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. After saying this, Jesus said to Peter, "Follow me." Peter turned around and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them. This was the one who had leaned against Jesus at the meal and asked him, "Lord, who's going to betray you?" When Peter saw this disciple, he said to Jesus, "Lord, what about him?" Jesus replied, "If I want him to remain until I come, what difference does that make to you? You must follow me." Therefore, the word spread among the brothers and sisters that this disciple wouldn't die. However, Jesus didn't say he wouldn't die, but only, "If I want him to remain till I come, what difference does that make to you?"
In a moment, we're going to talk about a little bit of the legend behind John, and you'll see why maybe that rumor was spread. So after calling Peter to mutual love, which Peter affirms, Jesus gives Peter the full picture of what his love is going to cost him.
But not clearly. Like, he doesn't clearly outline what's going to happen.
Yes.
And it seems to me like Peter just deletes it and moves on to something else anyway.
Yeah, you're right. Peter does ignore it, but yeah, we don't know if Peter fully understood what Jesus meant with these words. John understood, because John is writing after Peter's death, like we talked about. But the point here is that, Peter, your love is going to cost you. And that's the thing, is that love costs something. It's sacrificial. And John tells us after the fact that Jesus is talking about Peter's death, about his martyrdom. The stretching out of hands is a description of crucifixion. And so Jesus is saying that Peter's love for him is going to cost him his life. And in spite of knowing this supreme cost, Jesus says, follow me. Which, here's the interesting, cool, ironic, I don't know what the right word is, but here's a neat thing, is that that's exactly what Peter said he was going to do in John 13 and Matthew 26. I will follow you, Jesus, to the point of death. But Jesus now is letting him know, you are going to have another chance to live by those words. And I am assuring you that even though you are going to be unwilling, like we know he was unwilling because Jesus says you're going to be led where you don't want to go, Peter is going to have the strength to endure. And according to church tradition, this is exactly what happened. Peter was crucified upside down by Emperor Nero in 64 CE.
Brutal.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a little bit of ambiguity about why upside down. Some people say it's because it was just Nero's twisted way. And some people say that Peter said, I'm not good enough to be crucified the same way as my Lord. And so flip me upside down. And it was Peter's choice to go upside down.
Yeah.
We don't know. But the crazy thing for me is that this still happens today. Every day around the world, people get killed for their faith in Jesus. And I think it's stunning that they remain faithful to Jesus. Like, truly, I think we are going to be surprised in heaven by who the true heroes of faith are. I don't think it's going to be some mega church pastor who, quote unquote, sacrifices 60 hours a week in a multi-million-dollar complex and is lauded upon by his or her congregations of thousands. They have truly received their due. It's more likely, these heroes of faith, it's much more likely to be some anonymous follower of Jesus who chose to die rather than renounce their faith in Christ.
Agreed, but I also think that there's just so many unsung heroes. They're never going to get martyred, but who are going to be heroes of faith simply because they are like simply and quietly, authentically living out lives of love in their worlds. You don't have to get killed in order to be a hero of the faith.
No.
What you have to do is love.
You have to love and follow Jesus. And so,
even if no one notices ever.
Yeah, that's well said. And then as we head into the next part of the story, I think this is really interesting.
Such a weird,
so
weird.
John writes that the disciple whom Jesus loved has been following Jesus and Peter. And I just want to know why. Like, why is he, like, if Peter and Jesus are walking along the seashore, why is the beloved disciple following them?
Perhaps so that he could record this to put it in the book of John later. Perhaps. But yeah, I just find it so strange. This whole, I don't know. Once again, there's the disciple whom Jesus loved. Once again, we're going to see this rivalry kind of. And once again, Peter is kind of painted in a bad light and the disciple whom Jesus loved is not. So it's just weird.
Yeah. So like we mentioned the meditation, there have been several comparisons thus far by John of Peter and the beloved disciple. And they're often shown in contrast with one another. And every time the beloved disciple comes out on top. And here, Peter enters into this comparison game.
Yeah.
And he asks, like, he sees the beloved disciple following them and says, so Jesus, what about this guy? What about him?
It's like, he's got ADHD and it's like, squirrel. Yeah, you said something to him so important to me, but what about that guy?
Yeah,
that's in my line of vision right now.
Yeah, I like what David Guzik says. He says, Peter represents most of us. It's easy to deflect any personal challenge from Jesus by wondering or worrying about what other disciples are doing and what Jesus may require of them. So Jesus says to Peter, hey, Peter, you're going to be led to a place you don't want to go, and you're going to die for me. And Peter doesn't acknowledge that at all. He goes, what about that guy? What about him? And the other quote I like is the one we said by J.C. Ryle, none do so much harm to religion as those who are busybodies about others' salvation and at the same time neglectors of their own. I just thought that was very powerful and poignant.
Yeah, we highlighted that on our Instagram post because it was so good. I just find this is like a pattern with Peter, right? Jesus says something very important. Like he had just said, hey, love others. And then Peter says, I'm going to die for you.
Yeah.
And then here he's, Peter, follow me even to your death. And Peter misses the plot and focuses instead on, is his mission going to be better or worse than mine? Is he going to be more important than me, or am I going to be more important?
Is he going to die too?
So Peter still is not transformed here. Like he is still
Yeah.
the same guy. He's still unsteady and not the rock.
Yes. Yeah. And Jesus is pretty point blank blunt with him. He basically just says, Peter, mind your own business. You follow me. If I want this guy to stay alive till I come back, or if I want this guy to do this or that,
Yeah.
who is no concern of yours. You follow me.
I feel like, though, it would be hard for Peter to know, okay, I'm going to embark on this big ministry, but it's going to end in a brutal death. And it would have been hard for him to know that John's future, he got imprisoned and stuff, but he just has this cushy life and dies of old age, and Peter gets his brutal crucifixion.
Yeah, but here's the thing, that this is where we get to the legend of John. I don't know if cushier would be the right term, because the legend around John is that the emperor, I think it was Emperor Domitian, but one of the emperors tried to kill him by putting him in a vat of boiling oil. But John wouldn't die. And so the emperor got so frustrated, he said, fine, you're off to Patmos, and exiled him.
Which is a prison island.
Yeah, prison island. But the legend says they tried to kill John, martyr him, but he didn't die, which could contribute to that rumor that he would never die.
Yeah.
And so maybe when he writes this, he's saying, yeah, I know all that stuff happened, but Jesus didn't mean he wasn't gonna die. Jesus just meant, Peter, mind your own business and follow me.
Yeah.
So of course, this means, like we said in the meditation, there can be different paths in discipleship, like different ways of following Jesus. And so some are very passionate followers, like Peter. Some are very quiet, like, I'm guessing, like the disciple whom Jesus loved. Some are called to do something public. Others are called not to do something public. But we are all called to follow Jesus where he leads us and not where he leads the person next to us. And so the issue for us is, am I following Jesus as he leads me? Not, am I following Jesus like that other person?
Yeah.
And am I going to let that other person follow Jesus the way that Jesus leads him or her?
Yeah. Or am I allowing this other person to tell me what my call for following Jesus looks like?
Yeah.
Instead of discerning it myself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think it's a real temptation, though, for us, though. It's hard not to look around at what others are doing and not judge, because sometimes we can be envious because somebody else can follow Jesus in a certain way that you have difficulty with, or they're really steady and you're not, or they can do contemplative practices and you don't, or they have a thriving ministry and you don't have, or they can love people that you can't. And we can also, on the flip side, look at people and get superior and thinking, oh, I'm doing such a better job at this discipleship thing than they are.
Like, look at them, they're such a mess.
Yeah, so the temptation is in your own spiritual journey to look around and judge people as better or worse than you. But the point Jesus is making, not just to Peter, but this is written in here for all of us, so that we don't worry about anybody else's spiritual journey but our own.
Yes.
That's all that matters. Like, we just need to focus on continuing to build a life that loves God and loves others, and don't waste any time judging whether or not others are doing better or worse than you, or they have a better life or ministry than you do.
Totally.
It's just about being like content with where you are, understanding that you have all you need, and you just need to keep focused on Jesus.
Yeah, I think you see that philosophy all throughout Scripture.
Yeah.
Even in the Jesus teaching of, hey, don't focus on the speck in your brother or sister's eye when you've got the log in your own. Basically, it's, hey, you are responsible for your walk with Christ.
Yeah.
You are not responsible for anyone else's.
Yeah.
And so you don't need to meddle there.
Yeah.
I do think there are times where, like for example, in pastoral ministry and stuff, where you are called to speak into a person's, or ask questions about a person's discipleship journey, but that is role within the church, and it's not that everyone should be poking their fingers in everyone else's discipleship journey.
Yeah, and if you are focused on how like bad other people are doing, or how good you are doing, or how much better other people are, like, you'll just be miserable all the time. You're either going to feed into your own superior ego, or you're going to feed into your own worthlessness. And so neither of those are healthy for you.
Yeah. Okay, why don't we hit our last two verses in the entire gospel?
This is so bizarre that we have made it here. Everyone, here we go.
Okay.
Verses 24 and 25, the final verses in John's Gospel, in the slow journey through John, episode 338. This is the disciple who testifies concerning these things and who wrote them down. we know that his testimony is true. Jesus did many other things as well. If all of them were recorded, I imagine the world itself wouldn't have enough room for the scrolls that would be written.
Yes. All right. This is a good ending. I think the last two verses of chapter 20 is maybe a better ending, but this is a fine ending
I don't know
too.
why they had to do this. I guess
Yes.
they needed to restore Peter. So
Yeah.
that's
And
fine.
they needed to dispel the rumor the disciple whom Jesus loved was going to live forever. But let's wrap this up. First, the author mentions either himself or his primary source. He says, this is the disciple who testifies. So he's referring to the one from the previous verses, the one about whom the rumor spread that he would not die. So he is referring to the disciple whom Jesus loved, which tells us that the disciple whom Jesus loved is either the author of this gospel or the primary source of the author of this gospel. And it does make sense because he's the one who had this unique relationship with Jesus. He's the one who knew him best. He was the one who was with Jesus at all the key moments of his ministry. But then John says, we know his testimony is true. David Ford points out that in the earliest manuscripts, the Gospel of John was anonymous. All the Gospels were anonymous. Their titles, which attributed authorship, were added later. But even those titles don't identify which John or which Matthew or Mark or Luke wrote these works. And so it was not until the second and third centuries that people started attributing this gospel to John, the son of Zebedee, this disciple of Jesus. So from the beginning of A Slow Journey Through John, we've gone with the interpretation that the author is John, son of Zebedee. Jamie, you and I have been sparring back and forth about who the disciple whom Jesus loved is. But when we go with these verses here, we know that the disciple whom Jesus loved is either John himself or John's main eyewitness for his gospel.
Okay, and I think that the issue here is that one phrase where it says, we know his testimony is true.
Yes.
This is my theory, okay?
Okay.
When Paul wrote his letters, he dictated his letters to a scribe. And at the very end of many of his letters,
Yep.
he writes, I, Paul, am writing this in my own hand. Hello to so-and-so. And I wonder if that's what's happening here, because right here, he's John, I do still believe it's John. He's saying, this is a disciple who testifies concerning these things and who wrote them down. And then other people are writing down, like the community is saying, we validate this guy's testimony. And then John continues again and said, Jesus did many other things as well. So I wonder if it's just that.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Paul had a scribe, right?
Yeah.
Who wrote, like Paul dictated to someone. And just like Paul says, I write this with my own hands. There's a couple letters where I forget his name now, but the scribe himself also says, and I, whoever, also say hi. So it could be that John's an old man and he is dictating this gospel to his community who are writing it down. And so he's just dictated it. And then at the very end, the scribe or the community of scribes says, we validate John's testimony. We know it to be true. In the end, though, this is really interesting theories and conjecture, but the most important point, the main point is that these last two verses are affirming to us, hey, this is reliable testimony.
Yeah.
You can trust what you have read in this gospel. We affirm it. Also, though, there is more to Jesus than what's in this gospel. Like he says, Jesus did many other things as well, right? And if they're all recorded, all the world's books wouldn't hold it. And so the way we put it in the meditation was, there's more to God than we will ever know. And these many other things which Jesus has done, I like to think of it as it's his continual work through the last 2,000 years, right?
Like the mustard seed that started on earth with Jesus is just multiplying, multiplying. And it's like nothing could contain all the things that he has done right now.
Over the last 2,000 years, you could never write down everything that Jesus has done through the church,
all
through
these
his
individual people's lives.
Yes, exactly. Which we said this in the meditation, but this is what the point I want to emphasize. It means that we should be highly suspicious of any person who claims certainty on knowing God and fully knowing how he acts in the world.
Yeah.
Because we don't know. There's many more things that have gone on than what we have just read.
And also, he's acting in different ways in different cultures and different contexts and in ways that you just don't expect. And much of the turmoil in the Christian world comes from people insisting that they alone know the ways that God acts in the world.
Yes, I totally agree.
Yeah.
On the flip side of that, I think John wants us to know that even though there's way more to Jesus than he has written down, he wants his reader, he wants us to know, but I've written down enough. I've given you enough glimpses of who Jesus is, what he offers, how to receive it.
You need nothing else.
I've given you the answer to who is Jesus. He's the Lord and God. He's the Word made flesh. He's come to dwell among us. He's sent from above to the world he loves, this world that rejects him. And now Jesus sends you and I into that world. And so with that, we wrap up the text of the Gospel of John. And so next week, like we said, we're going to go through a conclusion of sorts, a slow landing to a slow journey. But this is the end of the actual Gospel. Jamie, how are you feeling now at the end of our penultimate Explore episode?
Yeah, feeling a little sad, actually. This has been such a labor. It's been a labor, but it's also been love. Like, I've loved this. I've enjoyed doing this. We've been praying through it, hoping that it's helping people. And I've just found it very life-giving. It's really helped me. Actually, when we started this, I think, even when we started dreaming about this, I was just burnt out. I was disillusioned with church, and now I feel all really fired up and back to myself again. Yeah. How about you? I took on 2 chapters of John, and it was a lot of work. And you did all the rest of the chapters, which has been very intense in our house for you. Like, you've been totally immersed in the Gospel of John and studying and research and editing and all this other stuff and writing and recording. How's it been for you? How does it feel for you to be done with this?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say that you've been doing your master's, and so I've had a way more space in my week to do this than you have, but it was still a lot of work. And I'm going to share, I think, my main thoughts for next week, our Explore next week. But I would say for me right now, I feel a little untethered because I've had this structure, this weekly structure for an entire year of certain days doing certain things and certain times of the day doing certain things, my reading, my researching, my recording, editing, all that, the writing part. And so all of a sudden that structure's done. And now I feel like I just feel untethered to whatever was my rhythm of my last year. And I feel a little lost.
You sound like you're feeling a little lost.
Yeah, like I know there's a next, and I know we've talked a little bit about what could possibly be next, but there's nothing concrete.
Yeah, it's very ambiguous and amorphous at the moment.
And I think that's good, because I don't think we should be deciding that right now at the end of slow journey through John. But yeah, I do feel a bit untethered and
quite unsettling for you to like settle in. We're going to be finishing all the episodes today. After this one, we're recording the final one. Yeah, it's going to be a little unsettling for you. And
totally. Maybe I'll sleep in one day.
I doubt it. Yeah. Anyway, on behalf of all of us, we're just really grateful for this is your vision. This is your passion. You've done such a great job. You've taught so many people. You've taught people how to do spiritual practices. You've just, well done, Nick. Don't delete that out. Okay.
All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this second to last Explore episode. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.